Okay,
Yes.
welcome and thank you. Yes, thank you, Caroline. Uh, Welcome on the second module and thank you for joining. Before I start introducing today, let's start off with a recap of some practical information about the program, and so you can make the choice if you haven't done so yet, as we saw that many of you did not yet decided on whether or not to choose for the certificate track or just follow the program as such. In any case, today is online. As you see, you are used to this. If you have questions, don't hesitate in the Q&A. You can type your questions, but we highly or stimulate interactive participation. And if you have a question that you would like to raise to the presenter, don't hesitate to type your question and you will be upgraded to a panel participant so you can ask your question live. And then please start by introducing your name and where you come from or where your background is and your university. So today is everything about the regulatory challenges and opportunities and value-based healthcare. What I first would like to say too is that you need to register for the annual event coming up on 13th of March, where you will have the chance to listen to Professor Michel Kazachkin, who presents everything about challenges of unequal access to innovative therapies and vaccines due to inequalities and differences between health systems, but also very often due to a lack of leadership and systems thinking. So please register for this event so we know how much cocktails we need to order. And then I would like you to scan this code if you haven't registered yet, because this code leads you to the form where you can choose, and you need to, in any case, register whether or not you follow this certificate track. We need to know definitely what type of track you choose, because well, as you know, as I explained last week, all of you will finish this course with an exam. But for some of you, this 5 ECTS track or the credits that you get awarded, depending on your university, you will get a score on 100%. But if you choose to do this certificate track, you also, of course, have to do this MCQ exam, and then it will be followed by 3 workshops, 1 or 2 workshops on the Friday, the 21st of March, and a second on the 22nd of March. And you will also do your group dissertation. So the MCQ exam is for everybody, is scheduled on the 4th of April. We will start at 9. I will give some more or give some information on how to do this exam. And I will also give you the option to do an online testing so you feel comfortable with the UV system and how this MCQ exam will take place. And as explained before, we have, for those who want to obtain this certificate in healthcare innovation, we have the interactive workshop, wherein you will be introduced in the challenges related to the use of data when bringing healthcare innovations on the market. You will also play a board game on the morning of 21st of March, which will introduce you to the amazing world of drug repurposing. And then on the Saturday, we have from 10 to 4 an on-site workshop where we hope to further develop your negotiation skills. If you choose to follow this certificate track, we expect you to be there. Of course, as you understand, we invite speakers coming from different horizons and from, amongst others, Geneva. Anatole Kratiger is a former director at WIPO, so the World Intellectual Property Organization, and he doesn't want to be there in front of an empty room, obviously. And those case studies that you will work on, you will be, as I told you last week, you will be put according to your topic preference. So you give your top 3, also by scanning this form of topics that you are interested in. It can be more on gene therapies or securing European competitiveness, pediatric formulations, or, for example, drug repurposing. So this date here, I will change it for the slides that I will upload. We expect you today, by the end of business, utterly this weekend, we expect you to define which track you will follow and also to make your choice of the case study topic. Of course, Here, you will be placed, as I told you, in groups of 3 to 5 participants, very interdisciplinary or as much as possible. And we expect you to submit a 10 pages dissertation, which you will then on the 25th of April defend. And it's a half-hour presentation where you defend 15 minutes with all the participants in your group, and you will be asked some questions with respect to what you gained from the program. You will gain these insights, and you will be asked questions by an interdisciplinary jury. The idea, really, because each year we have the same, is that some people are free riders and that others in the group do all the work. This is really not the idea. So this is why we will ask you to answer some questions. And the idea is really that you learn from each other, that you discuss, and that you share your insights and your skills, because others can really benefit from it. And as I told you last week, we don't want a scientific literature review, but we really want to address it, or that you address the topic as a scientific paper. So really going over an introduction of your topic, giving the content, focus on a specific area, for example, a specific country. When you talk about low and middle income countries, then define your region, define the burden of disease. Also say where you, of course, it's scientific, so be a rigorous scientist, refer to correct references, and then you go to the results and a discussion. And of course, the references, figures, tables that you potentially use, this can be definitely put in appendix. Voila, this was more or less all with respect to the practicalities. And now, by looking a little to what we've seen last week, we also want to have a look on what we can expect for today. So last week we saw that what this course entailed, already providing you with an insight in how translational medicine looked like, highlighting some of the latest evolutions in the field and the challenges we face. And this age of insular R&D organization is really over. To serve a company's innovation engine, R&D strategy needs to be equipped for today's fast-moving world. Pharma R&D return on investment falls. We saw that through the slides of Professor Flamion. It fell in post-pandemic market. And after COVID-19, the projected return on investment in R&D in 2022 had fallen to 1.2%, the lowest return on investment seen in more than a decade. But from Deloitte's Pharmaceutical Innovation Report from 2023, we now know that the projected return on investment in pharma research and development in 23 has risen to 4.1%, climbing back from the 2022 record low of 1.2%. The leading 20 global pharmaceutical companies collectively spent $145 billion on R&D in 2023, which is up to 4.5% from 2022. So the total sales revenues for those leading 20 pharmaceutical companies continues to trend upwards, increasing by 9.6%. So a very clear trend in the past years is the pharma's investment in rare diseases. So that these are the diseases that are life-threatening, chronically debilitating, and affect or have a low prevalence. So the low prevalence means that rare diseases affect a very small portion of the population, less than 5 in 10,000 people in the community. So 1/3 of the development programs targeted rare diseases in 2023. Now the question is, where are we with turning inventions into innovations that add value for the patient? Last week, Professor Flamion took you through the challenging drug development cycle from knowledge generation to clinical application. And again, you see that this is not a straight line from basic research to improved patient outcomes. It's a continuous process of going back and forth, as I also explained, and all the different actors in the various phases need common information based on data collection and management, integration of that data, knowledge management, delivery, and the presentation, obviously. Professor Flamion also highlighted the challenges industry faces. The R&D operating models continue to experience significant pressure due to ongoing regulatory challenges, impeding an unprecedented scale of the loss of exclusivity of high-value assets, the so-called patent cliffs that he referred to, rapid pace of scientific and technology advances, and then the personalized treatment, including gene editing treatments, are the future. But obviously, this implies a rising protocol design complexity and costs of novel biomarkers and diagnostics. Sorry. Last week, we touched upon the different steps in the drug development process, and it is a bumpy road. We saw that it's difficult to balance awarding organizations, whether they be private or public, intellectual property rights that could lead to a monopoly position in that market. More and more such patent rights are linked to exuberant high prices of the drugs reaching the market. Again, the question is whether those inventions are being turned into innovations that add improved outcomes for patients and that add to the quality of life. We touched briefly upon the technology transfer from basic research findings, often spinning from academic research to spin-out companies, or sometimes immediately to big pharma companies. And Professor Goldman elaborated on the regulatory science and evolution since the last decade, notably during and after the COVID pandemic, and we'll definitely touch upon this later. The payer's approval, well, that's what's needed to perform a health technology or HTA assessment to inform governments whether or not to reimburse therapies for patients. And remember, I told you the story of Pia and her 2 million euro Zolgensma gene editing shot. Well, this case actually touches upon all the aspects here, particularly the access for the patient and how such innovative drugs weigh upon our health budget. Very complex, and we need a myriad of experts from different horizons to think about the complexities we increasingly face. Well, to answer the question whether we are turning inventions into innovations that add value for those patients, I'm very happy to announce that this afternoon we'll discuss value-based healthcare. We have different experts' perspectives reflecting on the prices of drugs and whether we get the value for the money that our reimbursement agencies pay. So this afternoon, we have a researcher reflecting on the health budget's impact of innovative drugs, as well as an HTA expert and two people from Novartis who nowadays bring Zolgensma to the market. And then patient access, of course, well, it's all about patients, and without patients, no markets. Professor Goldman showed us that all the pieces of the puzzle were needed to complete it and bring so many vaccines in a record time to the society during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the need for the interdisciplinary science has never been greater. And he pointed towards the place of the patient here, right in the center. Patients are often viewed as consumers, and although they often don't have the choice to consume or not, they do have preferences, and one patient is not the other patient, and their needs are different. And then to end this, there's the post-marketing surveillance, or the so-called phase 4 trials, where we monitor patients in a real-world setting, where the newly approved drugs interact with everything that might have been overlooked in a clinical trial setting, such as patient adherence to medication and so on. Professor Flamion introduced you to the challenges that come along with this complex process. There are many incentives that stimulate innovation, and in return for this monopoly position offered through the patent system, the health sector is highly regulated. He further mentioned also the differences between the medical devices and the drug development sector. And we see that regulatory science continues to evolve within recent years, also real-world evidence and AI-generated data used to be added to the clinical trial data. As Professor Flamion stated in his takeaway message, the major upcoming impact of AI may be on clinical development, not so much on the R&D discovery. And AI is yet to be a game changer in pharma R&D. So far, the anticipated impact is rather limited, but for sure, times will change. And for those who are not familiar with the drug development sector and regulations, don't worry. We realize that there's a lot of information that comes at you at a very high pace. But what is important is that after basic lab research and having tested concepts in the lab, we work towards a proof of concept that we will be testing in humans. And the different steps and phases in clinical trials will be explained to you in a minute. What is important for all of you to understand is that this whole process is very strictly regulated with GMP, GLP, and GCP measures that are very closely monitored, obviously with the safety of the patient in mind. So in the stage of basic drug discovery, GMP points to good manufacturing practice in place from the early drug discovering in the lab over the whole drug development process. And further, as we move on in this process of preclinical research, good laboratory practice, or GLP, also becomes crucial with the aim to obtain evidence for safety and toxicity in cells and tissues via in vitro testing and animals through in vivo testing. And further, that we also don't sacrifice animals unnecessarily. And then after having proven safety and toxicity in vitro and in vivo, the first exposure of this new molecular compound can be tested in human subjects. At the time of preclinical success stories, spin-off companies are being set up, and obviously they search for investors to overcome this so-called valley of death, because that's when the cost of development really starts to rise, when you want to test a compound in humans during the different clinical trials. Now, that is exactly what is figured here in this triangle. Well, then let's have a look at the drug development cycle first. As you know, the attrition rate in pharma is very high, with for the 10,000 projects that enter the pipeline, only one successful drug reached the market. And half of the drugs in phase 3 trials will not even reach the approval stage. Only 1 in 5 approved drugs generate revenue to offset their development costs. And of course, with respect to the patents, you see that in return for turning this invention into an innovation and making it publicly available so others can further build on it and improve the invention, the innovator is rewarded with some market exclusivities, such as patents, market and data exclusivities that can lead to this monopoly position. And obviously, as I already stated, in return for these exclusive rights, the authorities strictly regulate the products that enter the market and ensure that our drugs are safe and effective. And it sounds very simple, showing safety and efficacy through the different phases in this drug development process, but I assume you already grasped that it's not that simple and straightforward. And what I want to show you here is that there is an increasing importance to the patient in this technical development process. This slide, as Professor Flamion showed, simplifies this scheme. And you see that in the center, there's this continuous process of testing and reviewing with authorities. There is really this place for the patient, his or her needs, perspectives, and the need for access. Some of these incentives issued, so the push and pull mechanisms that stimulate innovation depend on the patient's need. For example, the orphan drugs developed in the treatment for rare and sometimes even ultra-rare diseases, they can benefit from very long exclusivity periods, and you'll hear definitely more about this this afternoon, but they fulfill an unmet medical needs. And included in this newly proposed European pharmaceutical package that we'll discuss during the next module, the European Commission has come up with a new definition of unmet needs. So unmet needs may be viewed differently by important groups, perspectives, or factors, and they include considerations of the patient population, so taking into account the disease incidence, prevalence, and orphan designation. They also look to the disease severity, ascertaining the impact of the severity and burden of the disease, as well as end-of-life criteria. Or they take into account the existence of alternative treatments, determining the number of alternative treatments, how acceptable they are, the remaining morbidity and benefits of a novel molecule over the existing alternatives. And similarly, it is important to take into account the considerations of different stakeholders and perspective when developing a new therapeutic. In summary, based on regulatory requirements, industry defines unmet medical need as when there is a serious condition where either no available treatment exists, or if there is an available treatment, that this proposed product is expected to differentiate from available treatment based on one or more of the following criteria: the patient selection, the efficacy, and the treatment compliance. And to meet this unmet medical need, early patient access to treatments is very important. And regulators have adapted this regulatory framework to meet this demand for early access. We'll hear more about the different clinical trials, and the randomized controlled trial has been the golden standard for ages. But there are ways to provide earlier access to innovative treatments that meet this unmet medical needs. Because increasingly, the regulatory agencies approve a substantial number of drugs by means of fast-track and accelerated approval pathways that are intended to bring treatments to populations with serious illness and unmet medical needs. These pathways allow drugs to be approved either before large, well-controlled trials have been conducted, or when the results are available only from trials assessing unvalidated surrogate measures, for example, tumor response rate among patients with a certain cancer, and before the more definitive outcomes, for example, the overall survival. In these cases, the regulatory agencies must weigh the potential harms posed by a new drug against any early signs of benefit. The agency, of course, doesn't consider a drug's likely financial toxicity. And this then will be our afternoon journey. We'll hear more about the uncertainty accompanying the market authorization for orphan drugs, with enormously impact on drug prices, often targeted to specific patient group nowadays. So there is a difficult balance between the accessibility on the one hand and the affordability for our health system and for the patients. So there are many myriads of barriers for patients. And this morning, we'll discuss the innovations in clinical research. You've heard Professor Flamion and Professor Goldman last week that digitalization is ever evolving, particularly since the outbreak of the pandemic. They both last week pointed that never before so many patients have participated in clinical trials. And patients come with patient data. You'll also learn more about the privacy challenges in the health sector, and you'll understand more about the risks of data protection related to clinical research, the context and the risk-based approach, which is key. You'll be understanding your role and the role of society in the protection of the personal and health data and ensuring the respect of individuals' rights and freedoms. But digitalization doesn't mean just storing data to process it, but it needs to be done according, of course, to the rules of the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. And we know that decentralized elements have the potential to improve clinical trials. Regulators are involved in the process to embrace the evolution, to allow real-world data and real-world evidence from decentralized clinical trials. Decentralized clinical trials, they impact the need to be backed up. Of course, they need to be backed up by evidence, and they need to work for all stakeholders. And here we need really this collaborative discussion, because those workflows obviously need to be adapted. So we'll be discussing the difference between traditional trials, virtual trials, decentralized trials, and here the concept of real-world evidence, real-world data comes in. So this morning, you'll hear more about the evolution in clinical research in view of the rise and development of personalized therapies. AI integration in clinical trials, artificial intelligence is set up to reshape clinical trials, particularly in trial design, patient recruitment, and data analysis. We hear about the rise of decentralized clinical trials and patient-centric models. the future of clinical research, where the patient preference studies come in, and where we go in terms of where we go in the future in terms of regulatory advancements in clinical research. So this is the program for today, and I'm very proud